I am Philip Blackman with the Engineers and Architects of Hawaii. Featured in this month's program is rearview mirror columnist Bob Sigall. Bob talks of Hawaii's many gifts to the world, such as surfing, hula, volleyball, basketball, and the invention of the steel guitar. Hawaii also established some of the nation's earliest schools. People such as pop star Bruno Mars, to the nation's first Black president, were born and raised in Hawaii. I know you will enjoy this program as we did. Please email other of Hawaii's gifts to the world you think of to eahawaii@gmail.com. Mahalo.
It is my pleasure again to welcome Bob Sigall to another meeting of Engineers and Architects of Hawaii. Bob is Hawaii's Tusitala, the teller of tales. His trail from window washer to celebrated writer and author is a tale in itself. But today he will show us, in the spirit of the old lantern shows, now called photo talks, the things Hawaii has to be proud of. Please welcome, let's say, the things Hawaii has to be proud of. And I know that it's more than just Saimin. Please welcome Bob Sigall, a man who sees the whole world from his own rearview mirror.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the invitation. I've spoken to this group at least half a dozen times, maybe more. And so I thought I would give you a talk this time about things that I believe we should be proud of. I think to some extent we don't value Hawaii as highly as we should. There's a lot of things that we have done that are a huge contribution to the world. And so I hope to show you some of them. So for instance, Hawaii had schools 6 years before California. And we had a bunch of schools. If you can go to the next slide. So this is the first school, Lahainaluna, 1831. It was founded, the oldest school west of the Rocky Mountains in the United States. And Lahaina was the capital of Hawaii at the time, and Luna means above. The school was above Lahaina. This is Oahu Charity School. One of the missionaries and his wife, the Johnstones, started this school because there were a lot of sailors and officers from ships that were pulling into Honolulu who were having relations and getting married to Hawaiian women and producing offspring, and they didn't have a school for them. So the Oahu Charity School in 1832 was the first organized public school on Oahu. We had some disorganized schools that taught adults the Hawaiian language when it was formally put into writing, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But the first school for children on Oahu was Oahu Charity School. It was about where the Ali'i Olani school is. The statue of Kamehameha is in front of the Supreme Court building, Ali'i Olani Hale. And it would probably be in the area to the Diamond Head side of that where the parking lot is today. That's where this school originally was. Wow. This school ended up moving to where the main library is. And they changed the name to the area of the land that the school was on that used to be that is now our public library. Does anybody know what that area of land is called?
Library.
Pohukaina. It then moved down into Kaka'ako when the library was built and stayed Pohukaina School. It became one of the biggest schools on Oahu because Kaka'ako was a developing residential community, and it was a very important area of town until it shifted again to being more of an industrial area. The school then moved to the Kahala area where it still exists, and it is a special needs school for children with learning disabilities. This is Hilo boarding school started in 1836 as a feeder school for Lahainaluna. And it was founded with the idea that the students would work and produce agricultural things that the school would use, and that the school would be able to build itself with the students' work and maintain itself with that work. It originally was declared to be a teacher training school. Lahainaluna was training seminarians at the time. This was a school to train other teachers to go to other schools. And if it was in the United States, which it wasn't when it began, it would be the oldest vocational school in the United States, beating one in Boston by 40 years. This is Royal School. It was on the grounds of the state capitol. If you're on the state capitol building and you walk Diamond Head, that big grassy area right next to it is where the school was. The missionaries were asked by King Kamehameha III to create a school for the children who would be kings and queens and princes and princesses. There were 18 of them originally. Amos and Juliet Cook were the headmaster and headmistress. And the first kings and queens to be challenged them. They wanted to be superior to their headmaster. And he said, I am the headmaster here, not you. And they accepted all of that. They were not used to anyone telling them what to do. And a lot of them were badly behaved because no one could correct them except for their parents. But Amos Starr Cook did. And I think as a result of that, the kings and queens that we had were extremely kind to their people, benevolent as leaders, and productive as people that created things for the benefit of Hawaii. Almost every single one of our kings and queens has left something that is still around today doing good work, except for one of our kings. And I'll get to that in a little bit. So Royal School has moved in 1850 to where it is today, across from Jiffy Lube, just Malka of the Pacific Club, just next to the freeway. But it originally was for the kings and queens to be, and the princes and princesses. This is Punahou in 1841. It was the missionaries created a school for the children of Ali'i before they created a school for their own kids. And their own kids were being sent back to New England for an education. And some of them were well treated and some of them were not. And some of them were abandoned. So they felt a pressing need to create a school locally. And so they created Punahou. Before California had its first school, this is the lily pond at Punahou that gives its name to the school. Ka Punahou means the spring. New spring. And this is the spring. This is Governor Boki and his wife. Anybody know her name?
Liliha.
Liliha. The only picture we have of her that I'm aware of this painting, she's topless, of course, not showing anything, but nonetheless, a major contributor to Hawaii. Governor Boki unfortunately got bitten by the affluent bug. And he wanted to be the richest man in the kingdom. And he went off on a boat to look for islands that had sandalwood, because all the sandalwood in the islands practically had been harvested and sent to China. And we never heard from him again. He disappeared. We believe he was attacked by islanders in the South Pacific somewhere. And we don't know for sure what happened, but he never returned. But he and his wife, at the convincing of Queen Ka'ahumanu, who was the regent for her son, who became Kamehameha II, convinced them to donate this land to the missionaries to build their own school. That was 1841. Who recognizes this? Its name originally was Ahuimanu College. It was in the windward side, Ahuimanu Temple Valley. Goes back to 1846.
It's not Saint something.
Saint something. Only boys go to this school. Say it again. Not Damien. It is a St. Louis. It is a brother school to St. Louis. It was a Huimanu college or collage. I think they pronounced it the French way rather than English way. It was right up against the mountains. There's a housing area today. Next slide. It moved to the end of Baratania Street in the 1880s and changed its name to St. Louis because Louis Maigret was the bishop in Hawaii, and St. Louis was his favorite saint. St. Louis, the city, was named for him. Who knows what St. Louis, the man, did? Anybody?
Isn't he the warrior king, saint?
Yes, he is. He led 2 crusades. He was captured and he died in prison in Tunisia in the second one. And for that, they elevated him to sainthood. And St. Louis School and St. Louis, the city, are both named for him. So here it is at the end of Baratania Street. The area is on the other side, the Eva side of the Nuuanu Stream. It's across, it's where the Toyo Theater was. American Savings Bank now has a big facility there. And then they moved again to Oahu, which is the name for the bottom of St. Louis Heights in Kaimuki. And here's a picture of what it looked like originally. The stream, Palolo Stream, runs through here, and it took a while to build a bridge over it. Otherwise, they had to enter from the far side of the school off of St. Louis Drive. But this is a picture of it in its earlier iteration. You can see there are telephone lines going across it. No houses in St. Louis Heights. The area of town was donated to the Catholic Church. They then sold lots for people to build, and with that money, they built the school. 1846, so it's very old, and that is also the year that the oldest school in California began, in Menlo, California. So we had several schools in Hawaii before California had one, and California and Russia sent some of its children to Hawaii to be educated, because we had a great school system. And one of them became lieutenant governor of California later. Hawaii was also the most literate nation in the world in 1830. The missionaries came and they found a beautiful Hawaiian language, but it had not been put into written form. And so they had meetings, they discussed it, they listened to how people spoke. They decided, should we use the letter K or should we use the letter T? Because they heard K more if you went toward the Big Island and T more if you went more toward Kauai. And they decided not to use T, although it is okay if it is used, and you will see sometimes it is used. Queen Ka'ahumanu, who was had just taken over when her husband passed away, but her young son, who would be Alexander Liho, who would become Kamehameha II, was still too young to be the ruler, loved the missionaries, asked one of them, Laura Fish Judd, to be her personal teacher and to train everyone in her household, made sure that they were well taken care of, loved learning her own language, and encouraged her brethren to learn the printed word. So adults all over the country would sit under trees and in fields and be taught the written language of their country. And by the end of that period of time, they decided Hawaii was the most literate nation in the world. Over 80% of our adults could read and write. By the way, when they were taking words for the Hawaiian translation of the Bible, there were several words that did not exist in the Hawaiian language that did exist in English. So for instance, there is no word in Hawaiian for colors. Like if you say, well, red, green, and blue are all colors, there isn't a Hawaiian equivalent of that. They also didn't have some words for people's names. And Eva, I learned, is from the Hebrew for Eve. although in Hebrew it was something like Hawa. But the town of Eva in the plain beyond Pearl Harbor came from Adam's wife, Eve. We also had cowboys in 1832 compared to Texas when they traced their cowboy tradition to 1849. And you know the cowboy hats that you see people wearing today and these guys are wearing? That doesn't exist until about 1900. Cowboys in Texas before then wore bowler hats. They must have looked really ridiculous by today's standards.
Butch Cassidy.
By the way, the ones that came to Hawaii to be train the people in the kingdom to rope and care for cattle called themselves Españoles. And from that we got the word Paniolo. They also called themselves vaqueros, which literally means cowboys. Hawaii also had electricity before the White House and before Buckingham Palace. King Kalakaua had made an around-the-world tour. On it, he stopped in New Jersey, met with Thomas Edison, and asked him to bring electricity to the islands. And at the same time, the President of the United States, I think it was Hayes, was afraid of electricity and would not allow it until he left office. So Hawaii had electricity before the Buckingham Palace or the White House. So this is Queen's Hospital. Queen Emma and her husband, Kamehameha III, went around knocking on doors, raising money to build this hospital because the kingdom was broke. There wasn't enough money in the treasury to build it, and so they raised the money to build this hospital. In its first year, it was on Fort Street, where we are today. I can't quite tell where. The address was on 700 Fort Street, and that address doesn't exist. Excuse me, it was in the 160s, I believe. They've changed the way they address the street, and that address no longer exists. The beginning of Fort Street is in the 700 block today. So we're not exactly sure where it was, but it moved up here because there was an ample supply of water in the area. By the way, Queen Emma also created St. Andrew's Priory and St. Andrew's Cathedral with her husband. This is Lunalilo Home, where Roosevelt High School is today. William Lunalilo left this for the benefit of aged Hawaiians. Unfortunately, he made a major mistake in his will. He required his trustees to sell all of his property. And at the time, it was almost worthless. Whereas Queen Emma, who kept all of her property in her estate, it's now worth several $billions. But this is where it was originally, and then they moved to Hawaii Kai. Maunalua was its name at the time, and it took over what had been Marconi's Hotel. The Marconi Hotel was for visiting electricians who came to build the telegraph stations that we had at either side of the island so that we could send teletype back and forth from the mainland before there were transatlantic cables. Hawaii also participated in creating 4 major sports. Can you name one of them?
Surfing.
Surfing, very good. Baseball, this is Alexander Joy Cartwright. He laid down the modern rules of baseball in the 1840s in New York. And then he decided when the gold rush began in California, he would go there. And he got dysentery, he was unhappy, and there was a boat leaving for Hawaii, and he got on it. He became our first fire chief. He became one of the founders of our library system, and he brought baseball to the islands. Who can name another sport that we have? Surfing and baseball. There are 2 other major sports. This is Luther Gulick Jr. His father was a missionary surgeon. He went to Springfield, Massachusetts, and he saw that the staff was at the YMCA there was out of shape in the wintertime when they were supposed to be doing calisthenics. And they said it's boring. So he asked them to create games that could be played indoors in the wintertime. And they created basketball, and
Pickleball.
volleyball.
Oh,
Pickleball is, I think, a little bit newer. But one of them came up with basketball, and one of them came up with volleyball. And a lot of people don't know that a Hawaii person is the source of those two games. And of course, when the missionaries came, they found Hawaiian surfing. They did not find that in other islands in the Pacific. It was only in Hawaii. Anybody recognize this young man?
he's discovered Machu Picchu?
No. That's coming up. This is Samuel C. Armstrong. At 26, he enlisted in the Civil War as a captain. He captained an all-black regiment. He got promoted and promoted and promoted, and it was present at Appomattox when Lee surrendered. And he was, at that time, a brigadier general. He was aware of the situation that blacks that were newly freed would have to face, and decided that he should create a school to train them to be able to cope with their new freedom. And that school is still a major school today in Virginia. Who knows the name of it?
You have a football team, right?
I believe they do.
I can't think of it. Howard?
It is the Hampton Institute. And if you go to their chapel, you'll find a block of coral that was sent to them from Kawaiiau Church. Here's another picture of him in his military uniform. He was born in Wailuku. His father was the kahu at Kawaiiau Church. This is Hampton Institute in Virginia.
Wow.
And then one of its graduates was Booker T. Washington, and he was a graduate of Hampton, and he was asked to go to another school that was failing and take the model that Hampton used, which was based on the Hilo boarding school model of vocational education, and take over another school that is considered one of the biggest schools in the South today.
It's got to be Bama.
It is in Alabama, but it is not the University of Alabama. Good guess. Tuskegee. So Booker T. Washington took over the Tuskegee Institute, brought with him the model that they had used from the Hilo boarding school, and today it's in the top 5 schools in the South. This is not far from here, in the area near Restaurant Row. This is scientists from all over the world spread out in the 1870s to watch a transit of a planet across the surface of the sun. What planet did they watch?
Venus.
And what was the purpose?
To determine the distance from us to the sun.
Yes, the astronomical unit.
They knew everything relative, but not absolute. And that's the absolute distance.
The estimate at the time was anywhere from close to where we are to half the size of the actual solar system. And so by measuring the transit of Venus across the surface of the sun, without computers, took about 8 years to calculate by hand in England. But they watched it in 3 places in Hawaii, which had the clearest skies. They were also in Tahiti and England and a few other places around the world. And by comparing the parallax between those places, they were able to calculate within 1% the size of our solar system.
I think that was the point Mac was trying to make.
Parallelograms. Another thing that we should be proud of, by the way, King Kamehameha, King Kalakaua sent his band to entertain these scientists who were down near the Restaurant Row. Another thing we should be proud of, our 442nd Infantry Battalion is the most highly decorated regiment in the history of the United States. 21 Medal of Honor recipients, 18,000 of the soldiers were given awards, 4,000 of them Purple Hearts, 4,000 Bronze Stars. Who knows what their motto was?
Go for broke.
Go for broke. And this is
Mr. Bingham?
Hiram
The
Bingham III. His grandfather, Hiram Bingham, founded Kauai Church and Punahou School. And his father became, this man's father, a missionary, a priest, and he studied for the priesthood. But then something happened. A boat came into Honolulu Harbor, and on it was the family that inherited the Tiffany jewelry store in New York. And they had 4 daughters, and he fell in love with one of them. And they looked at him and they said, there's no way we're letting a poor priest marry our daughter. So he dropped out of the ministry. He got a PhD in archaeology from Yale. He took over the Yale South American Museum. He became a curator of that museum and also Harvard's South American Museum. And in 1911, he was in Peru and he was doing a tour. And one of the guides says, you know, there are ruins several thousand feet above us. Why don't I show you? And he walked up there and he ended up writing a book. And the name of it was
How I Found the Top of the World.
Machu Picchu.
The Lost City of the Incas. And it was Machu Picchu, and the name of his book was The Lost City of the Incas. So he went from being a priest to being a PhD. The family gave him a valley for his wife, and they had 8 kids. He became governor of Connecticut and senator from Connecticut, all because a ship had pulled into Honolulu Harbor.
Hey, Bob,
Amazing.
before you move on, there's a store down here, Furniture Plus Design.
Yes.
It's owned in part or all by Charles Black. He's
Yes.
a member of the family.
Yes, I've talked to Charles several times.
He loves showing you a picture of his great-great-great-grandma being shipped back to the East Coast for education.
Yeah. He told me about how Indiana Jones was based on a character here in Hawaii. So that's one of the stories of his that I had no idea, but it turns out to be true that George Lucas was afraid when Star Wars came out that it was going to be a bomb. And he and Steven Spielberg decided if it was going to be, a bomb, that at least they'd be in Hawaii when it bombed. And they were making sandcastles on the beach. And they decided that the tradition was they would be in Hawaii when the movie came out, whatever movie it was. They'd make a sandcastle that night. And if the sandcastle was still there in the morning, if it hadn't been washed away, the movie was going to do well. And the movie did well, and the sandcastle was still there in the morning. So there's an architectural story for you. Not quite structural architecture, but still architecture nonetheless. Here's Machu Picchu. By the way, Machu Picchu is kind of closed at the moment. There is a lot of political dissent going on in Peru, and because of that, it's impossible to get to Machu Picchu
Safely.
Yeah, and so it's closed. Who recognizes this guy?
Samuel Clemens.
Yes, Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens came to Hawaii as a young man, wrote over 50 articles. He had convinced the Sacramento Bee to pay him $50, which is a lot of money back then, for each article. He went to 4 islands. And when he got back to the mainland, he didn't know what to do. He had written one book about a frog that could jump, had not written his major books yet. And he was telling friends about Hawaii, and they said, you really should put on a lecture. The public would love this. And he said, really, you think so? And they convinced him to do it. So he put up billboards around town. He rented a hall. He packed it. He made the equivalent of $6,000 in one night of telling tales about Hawaii. The audience loved it. He ended up doing over 100 lectures about Hawaii, which was terrific for us and our tourism, and it got his career going. 10 years later, he wrote his first book, and there was something unusual about this first book. What was unusual about how it was crafted? What invention? Typewriter. First book that we are aware of that was created on a typewriter. So here he is giving these lectures about Hawaii. The audience loved it, and he really got its footing. When he turned 70, the Visitors Bureau of Hawaii sent him a koa mantelpiece for his new home in Connecticut. And he wrote a thank you note, thanking them for something he could see every day that reminded him of the loveliest fleet of any islands that lie anchored in any ocean. And that's where that quote comes from. Who recognizes this young man?
Father Damien?
Yes, that is Father Damien. We have two saints from Hawaii. Father Damien came here from Brussels, Belgium, because his brother, who had gotten into the ministry, became sick and was too sick to serve. And so he said, take me, I'll go. And he was sent to the islands and originally sent to St. Louis School, where he earned his divinity degree. And he was ordained at Our Lady of Peace Cathedral downtown. And at the time, he and several others were sent to the Big Island. All the others were married, and he was single. And when Kalapapa was created, he volunteered because he didn't think it was right for a married priest to go and risk his life, and if he had a wife and children. Back then, Catholic priests could marry. Besides him, we also have, this is him on Kalapapa. Mother Mary Ann Cope came to the islands at the request of King Kalakaua with 7 other nuns to take care of people on Oahu with leprosy. They were at the Kaka'ako branch mission, where all of the people that had leprosy were originally sent to be ascertained whether they actually had leprosy or some other disease. And those that had leprosy were then sent to Kalapapa. This is Mother Mary Ann when Father Damien passed away at Molokai. And she took over and ran the mission, and the nuns from St. Francis of Syracuse, New York, are still in the islands doing good work today. And this is a painting they have on their campus of her with Molokai and Kalapapa in the background. They created several schools and hospitals in the island. King Kalakaua was the first king to be given a White House dinner. He went to Washington, D.C. in the 1870s to argue for Hawaii to be given reciprocity in trade with the United States. This was to benefit our sugar industry because there was a tax on imports from the islands and from the United States. And the president, Grant, threw him a White House dinner. First head of state anywhere in the world to be given a White House dinner. One more slide of him. By the way, the king was very sick at this time. However, he was given reciprocity, and that allowed our sugar industry to take off. Part of the reason why was that somebody created a chart of the world from a different perspective than anyone had seen before. That chart put Hawaii in the middle, where all the other charts had Hawaii way off on one side. And the senators and the president realized Hawaii was in a very important place and treated us with a great deal of respect. And it gave rise to a phrase about the islands. I'm not sure at this moment who created that phrase, but it describes the islands. Who can think of what that phrase is?
Crossroads.
Crossroads of the Pacific came from this chart. By the way, the chart was not seen widely, but in 1891, a woman came to Hawaii with her family and wrote a book about her summer in Hawaii, and she put this chart in the book. And because of that, the book was a bestseller, and it made Hawaii famous. And everybody saw that we were in an important position. And at the time, they were considering the Panama Canal. And everybody realized every ship coming through Panama going to Asia would want to stop in Hawaii to refuel and to put baggage on and cargo and to take supplies. So here's some things that Hawaii has to be proud of. We gave the world Barack Obama, Bette Midler, Divine Miss M. She was a performer at a gay bathhouse in New York, earning $50 a night. Her musical accompanist was a young man named Barry Manilow. Who recognizes this guy? He was a policeman in Honolulu that used a whip rather than a gun.
Jigger?
No, that's the Big Island. This is Chang Apana, and Earl Dare Biggers based a fictional character, the first Chinese fictional detective in the world. And the name of his book was
House Without a Key.
House Without a Key, and the character's name was Charlie Chan. Unfortunately turned into a bumbling detective by the movies. He wasn't that way in the book. And the House Without a Key name came from the fact that every house in Honolulu was unlocked. He would knock and people would say, come on in. None of the houses were locked. The House Without a Key became a restaurant at the Halekulani, which was about where he stayed. It is the oldest restaurant in Honolulu, we believe, that has been open continuously. Don Ho, at the time that he was famous, he said, we should have a president from Hawaii. How come we don't have a president from Hawaii? And he volunteered to be it. Peter, very good. Peter Rodriguez, better known as Bruno Mars. 24 karat gold. His brother is he his version of Over the Rainbow was #1 on the charts in Europe 5 years ago. It was famous all over the world. It has been used to sell hundreds of products. We don't do it in Hawaii, but it has been licensed and has generated millions of dollars for his wife and daughter. He left the Makahasans of Ni'ihau because they had never made any money. After all the people had been paid, and around them, there were 5 of them. He knew he wasn't going to live very long. His older brother had died at 28. He lived to be 36, and he left so that he might be able to create a legacy and fund his wife and daughter's future.
And his song, in the middle of the night, he went and got
he called the recording studio at 2 in the morning.
yeah,
He said, are you guys still open? And they
one
said,
take.
come on in. He recorded 3 songs, 1 take, gave it to John DeMello after he left Makahasans. He didn't know that it was going to be, anything special. Or DeMello said they would have put it as the first song on the album. It was 10th or 11th on the album.
It wasn't correct too.
Yes, the people that own the rights to it asked them to correct it because he mixed some of the lyrics up, and they said, we'd love to, but he's passed away. Hang down your head, Tom Dooley. Their name is?
A couple of Punahou kids.
Yes, the guy in the middle and on the right are from Punahou. Their name is?
Shane.
Kingston Trio.
Kingston Trio, thank you, on Zoom. This is at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Look how few people are on the beach behind them. This is in the late 50s.
That's because they were playing.
All on the other side.
This is Joseph Kekuku. He invented the steel guitar. Accidentally, he said. He dropped his comb on the guitar, and it made a nice sound. So he played around with it and played around with it. And he was giving concerts all across the United States. And today, the steel guitar is obviously huge in Hawaiian music, but also country music. Manuel Nunes is one of 3 people who were not sure, but one of them created the ukulele. This is his grave on King Street, and he's got an ukulele carved into the top of it. There's a Catholic cemetery near Ward Avenue. He's one of 3 people who claim to be the inventor of the ukulele, and we're not sure whether it was invented on the ship from Madeira coming to Hawaii, or whether it was invented soon after the ship arrived. but pretty soon people were playing this thing that they thought was jumping fleas, is what ukulele means. We gave the world hula and Hawaiian music. This is the Kodak Hula Show, created because tourists had a problem. What was the problem that tourists had that required a solution like this?
Film.
Film was slow, and almost all the luau and hula dancing and performing they saw was at night, and all their images came out blurred. So in the 30s, they created the Kodak Hula Show to sell film and give them a daylight exhibition that they could photograph. We also gave the world Saimin. This is from Dillingham Saimin, which unfortunately didn't make it through the COVID crisis. Aloha Shirts. By the way, we also gave the United States Casual Fridays. Hawaii, the clothing manufacturers were unhappy that all the business people were wearing suits that were made on the mainland when we had a beautiful, fashion industry here. So they created Aloha Friday, which is just the Fridays during the summertime, originally in 1964. And eventually it became every day of the week, and now it's Casual Fridays on the mainland. And that's it. Those are the things that I think Hawaii has contributed to the world. There's probably many more, but those are some that I can think of. I think we should be proud of our Aloha state and all that we have given to the world. Yes, please.
I just want to share with you that Boulevard Saimin, the firm I was with a long time ago, had an office above Boulevard Saimin.
Right.
And we'd be explaining to people how to get to the office, right? And then it kind of struck on it that, no, all you had to do is say, above Boulevard Saimin, everybody on that we spoke to knew what Boulevard Saimin.
It was run by two sisters who were fighting with each other. They were unhappy. I don't know what it was about, but one of them decided to open up her own place called Tanaka Saimin in the old Weyerhaeuser building on Nimitz Highway, and did not tell the other sister, and the lease was running out. And she found out just before the lease ran out, renewed the lease, took over and ran the restaurant. We had two of them at the same time, and unfortunately, it didn't survive the COVID situation. I was hoping that when it was over, they would reopen and take over the space, but it's now like a Melanesian market or something like that.
But the sisters inherited Boulevard Saimin from the dad, right?
Yes.
I remember the sisters worked at that restaurant.
No one will tell me what the Pilikia is. Just like there was Pilikia between the Kapono and Keola Beamer. And the only time they ever played again in the last 40 years was at their mother's funeral. Yes, please.
Any questions from our Zoom audience?
One addition to your Kingston Trio, Dave Guard, the tall one, found Bob Shane when Bob was an entertainer at the Pearl City Tavern, the Monkey Bar.
Right.
And the two of them then together took on Nick Reynolds and became the Kingston Trio.
Shane and I were corresponding with each other a little bit in the last year of his life. He told me some of his stories. I asked him, questions, and he responded to some of them. So I was really happy about that. But he started performing. He was told that that they were hiring people at Pearl City Tavern. How many of you went to Pearl City Tavern? So about half of us did. And he was so nervous that he drank 6 shots of alcohol before he got up and performed. But the owner who he had the shots with said that you couldn't tell he was drunk at all. And he was terrific. And so he played there for like a year before he finally went on to a few other places. And then he went back to the mainland where he got together with these other people in the Bay Area. And it all clicked together. And the Guard, Shane, and Reynolds became the Kingston Trio. When Guard left the group, John Stewart joined, who I thought had a beautiful voice. He then left, and I've got all of his albums. They're beautiful music. If you haven't listen to them. I used to play at the college when I was going there. Question?
The pineapple industry, even in the late sixties, represented 70% plus of the world production of pineapple. Was there some piece of ingenuity that was first happening here that made that?
Well, canning wasn't something that was created by Dole, but he thought it had the possibility of helping pineapple because pineapple was highly valued, but it would take weeks to move from one place to another, and by then it would rot. And so he decided to try canning pineapple, and it was a success. And then all of a sudden, you know, the industry grew from a little place on Wahiawa, to all over the islands, and then he bought the entire island of Lanai. Unfortunately, the Great Depression happened, and he lost the business. It went into receivership, and Castle and Cook took over at that time. By the way, Dole invented the punch can opener.
I didn't know that. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, also he developed the pineapple that fit in the can.
Yeah.
And almost every person our age in the islands who grew up here worked in a pineapple industry in one way or another. I have run 4 columns of their stories about working in the canneries in the summertime. We had something, you worked in one of the canneries? A lot of people told me they would take the bus home after working, and everybody on the bus would sit far away from them.
So that when you work there, you kind of didn't like pineapples within there.
Do you like pineapple today?
No, I do.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess recommend it for anybody that you really appreciate working, because, you know, it's sort of, you work hard, you know, and it makes you appreciate money and hard work. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yes, it did give people lasting values of hard work and patience, and you know, and putting up with things that maybe they didn't want to do for the benefit that would come later. Other questions?
I would point out, since my father was with the Board of Health, that Hawaii, it was either first or second. Always an argument between Massachusetts to have the first health department.
Oh, well, our Department of Health goes back to King Kamehameha III in the 1850s. I believe around 1853, we had a Department of Health. We done?
It's 1 o'clock.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it.
Okay, well, that concludes this Friday's meeting.
I just want to say one thing. I talked to Mary Ellen, and I discovered that Richard Cox, one of our old members, is 102 years old. Wow. He's still around, so obviously he's 102 years old.
So throw the money in those 401ks.
He's our neighbor on our street, so he's wonderful.
We have the speaker chair for next month here. You might want to say what we're going to hear next month.
Well, I don't know about all of next month, but March 3rd, we are bringing back Paul Fox to do, he's a firefighting specialist. He's going to look at this phenomena of these fires that have been climbing up the outside of buildings, and not really a problem in the U.S., but in other countries, where fires just Roman candle type thing. Just if you look up YouTube, you'll see some of these things. So he's going to take a look at that. He's great with video and those kinds of things. So it should be a very visual presentation.
And this will be out at the country club.
Sure. Yep.
So we're looking for a commitment of about 15 people. So let us know if you're going to come and meet us out there. And we'll put it on Zoom as well. All right.
Nice presentations. Thank you.
Engineers and architects of Hawaii welcome your comments on this program and any of our recent programs. We encourage your direct participation in this community outreach. So please email us your comments and ideas at eahawaii@gmail.com.